World War I, often called the Great War, was a conflict that engulfed nations, reshaped borders, and changed the course of history forever. But why did it happen? What events unfolded during the war? And how did the world recover in its aftermath? Today, we dive deep into the origins, battles, and lasting effects of one of the most devastating wars in human history. Chapter 1. Why did World War I happen? To understand why World War I happened, we must look at the complex web of alliances, rivalries, and tensions that were brewing in Europe during the early 20th century. It wasn't just one event that caused the war, but rather a mix of factors that set the stage for one of the deadliest conflicts in human history. The web of alliances. Europe was divided into two major alliances: the Triple Entente, which included France, Russia, and Britain, and the Triple Alliance, consisting of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. These alliances were originally intended to provide mutual security, but in reality they created a dangerous domino effect, where if one country was attacked, others were bound to come to its aid, pulling more nations into conflict. This system of alliances meant that even a small incident could escalate into a large-scale war. Nationalism and imperialism. Nationalism, the belief in the superiority of one's nation, also played a key role in stoking tensions across Europe. Many ethnic groups within large empires like Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire were seeking independence or greater autonomy, which made these multi-ethnic empires unstable. At the same time, European powers were vying for colonies and influence around the globe. This imperialism intensified rivalries, particularly in Africa and Asia, as countries like Britain, France, and Germany sought to expand their empires. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. On June 28, 1914, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, by Gavrilo Princip, a Serbian nationalist, acted as the spark that lit the fuse. Austria-Hungary viewed this as an act of aggression by Serbia and declared war. Within weeks, the system of alliances dragged the major powers into conflict. Russia mobilized to defend Serbia, which led Germany to declare war on Russia. France and Britain, allies of Russia, were soon involved, and the war spread rapidly. Long-term causes, the powder keg of Europe. It's important to understand that while the assassination of Franz Ferdinand triggered the war, it was not the sole cause. The Balkan region had long been called the powder keg of Europe due to the mix of nationalism and ethnic tensions. The Ottoman Empire, once dominant in the region, was in decline, creating power vacuums that both Austria-Hungary and Russia tried to fill. The assassination only set off a conflict that had been simmering for years. Chapter 2. What happened during the war? Once the war began in 1914, it quickly escalated into a global conflict, engulfing soldiers from Europe, Asia, Africa, and beyond. The brutality of the war shocked the world, with new technology making the battlefield deadlier than ever before. Trench warfare and the Western Front. The Western Front, which stretched from Belgium to the Swiss border, became a bloody stalemate. Trench warfare defined this front, with soldiers living in horrible conditions. Mud-filled trenches, battling not only the enemy but also disease, rats, and constant artillery bombardments. Progress was agonizingly slow. Battles like Verdun and the Somme became notorious for the staggering number of casualties. For example, during the Battle of the Somme in 1916, more than 1 million men were wounded or killed, with minimal territorial gains. The Eastern Front. On the Eastern Front, the war was more fluid and less stagnant than in the West. Here, Russian forces clashed with Germany and Austria-Hungary. Initially, Russia made some advances, but by 1917, the country was facing its own internal problems. The Russian Revolution broke out in 1917, with the overthrow of the Tsar and the rise of the Bolsheviks led by Vladimir Lenin. This revolution led to Russia's withdrawal from the war. The role of new technology. World War I marked the first use of many new military technologies that would forever change the nature of warfare. The introduction of machine guns, airplanes, tanks, and submarines made the war even more lethal. One of the most feared innovations was the use of chemical weapons. Poison gas, like chlorine and mustard gas, inflicted devastating injuries on soldiers, causing blindness, burns, and suffocation. Tanks, first introduced by the British at the Battle of the Somme in 1916, offered a way to break through enemy trenches, though their early versions were slow and unreliable. Global involvement and the US entry. Though the war started in Europe, it soon involved colonies and nations around the world. Soldiers from British and French colonies in Africa, India, and the Caribbean were called to fight on the front lines. The war also expanded into the Middle East, with the Ottoman Empire joining the Central Powers and fighting against the British and their Arab allies in campaigns that would reshape the Middle East. In 1917, the United States entered the war, partly due to Germany's unrestricted submarine warfare, which targeted American ships, and the Zimmermann Telegram, in which Germany encouraged Mexico to join the war against the U.S. This was a turning point. The fresh influx of American soldiers and resources helped tip the balance in favor of the Allies. The end of the war, armistice. By 1918, the Central Powers were on the verge of collapse. Germany faced severe food shortages, widespread strikes, and economic ruin. Austria-Hungary was disintegrating, and the Ottoman Empire had lost much of its territory. On November 11, 1918, an armistice was signed, officially bringing an end to the fighting. The war was over, but the world would soon realize that the peace that followed would be fragile. Chapter 3. What happened afterward? While the fighting stopped in 1918, the effects of World War I would shape the rest of the 20th century and beyond. The war had left Europe shattered, and its consequences would be felt for decades. The Treaty of Versailles. In 1919, the Treaty of Versailles was signed, officially ending the war. The treaty imposed harsh penalties on Germany. The country was forced to accept full responsibility for the war, pay massive reparations, and give up large amounts of territory. The treaty also restricted the size of Germany's military and imposed other humiliating conditions. Many Germans viewed the Treaty of Versailles as deeply unjust, and it created an atmosphere of anger and resentment that would later fuel the rise of Adolf Hitler and the outbreak of World War II. The collapse of empires. The war also led to the collapse of several of Europe's most powerful empires. The Austro-Hungarian Empire disintegrated, giving rise to new nations such as Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia. The Ottoman Empire fell apart, leading to the creation of modern states in the Middle East like Turkey and Iraq. The League of Nations. One of the key goals of U.S. President Woodrow Wilson was the creation of an international organization to prevent future wars, the League of Nations. The League was intended to be a forum where nations could resolve their disputes peacefully. Conclusion. World War I was a turning point in history. It redrew borders, reshaped politics, and left scars that are still visible today. As we reflect on the causes and consequences of the Great War, we must remember the lessons it taught us about the devastating cost of conflict. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more historical deep dives.